Go Jump in the Pool, a Bruno and Boots story by Gordon Korman. Chapter 13. Did someone mention money? "Is it ever good to be on this side of the counter?" exclaimed Bruno, enjoying his dinner. Boots nodded. "The last 3 days were pure torture. All we have to do now is get the fraud essays finished." "Yes," Bruno agreed, "and we better hurry because we've got to figure out a way to raise the rest of the money." Boots pounded a fist on the table. "Has your mind finally jumped its one track?" he shouted. "We are never going to raise all that money." "Money?" said a voice at the next table. "Did someone mention money?" Bruno and Boots turned to see George Wexford Smythe III regarding them with great interest. "We've been trying to raise money for a pool," Bruno told him. "I wouldn't expect you to understand that. It's vulgar." George picked up his yogurt and came over to join them. "Money, especially in vast quantities, is never vulgar," he said. "Why don't you tell me all about it?" "Where have you been?" asked Boots. "Don't you know about the swimming pool?" George looked mystified. "The budget won't allow us to build a pool, and we're in danger of losing students to York Academy because of it. That's why we've been trying to raise $25,000, so we can beat those turkeys in the next swim meet and keep our fathers happy." "You mean," said George, "all the horrid things that have been going on around the campus were for money?" Bruno and Boots nodded. "Well, that makes it different," declared George. "How much did you raise?" "About 7,500, said Bruno. And you need 25,000. That shouldn't be difficult." "What?" "My dear Bruno," said George, "didn't Melvin tell you that I am a financial giant?" "It's true!" exclaimed Boots breathlessly. "Okay," said Bruno, "but how are you going to take $7,500 and turn it into 25,000? "With considerable ease," said George smugly. "The stock market, of course. I happen to have an inside tip on a mining stock. If you will give me your money, I will invest it for you." "Hold on a minute," said Bruno. "I don't know much about the stock market, but if you can make money, you can also lose money. What if we buy and the stock goes down?" George stiffened. "My stocks never go down." Boots nodded. "That's true, too." "Okay," said Bruno. "Even if we trusted you, there's still a problem. The money's in a special bank account." "In whose name is the account?" asked George. "Ours," replied Bruno. George shrugged expressively. "Then I fail to see your problem. Go and withdraw the money at once. The stock market will not wait, you know." "We can't touch that money!" exclaimed Boots. "The fish would slaughter us." George smiled. "Mr. Sturgeon would have to find out about it before he could become angry, and when he does find out, it will be because you have all that money to give him." "My view exactly," said Bruno enthusiastically. "Boots, this is a really cool guy. Why wasn't I told about him?" "You were told," said Boots, "and you know what I told you. Bruno, if we lose that money, the fish will kill us for sure." Bruno ignored him. "George, how much time do we have to get to the bank?" "There should be a week or 2, George calculated. "But it is usually good to buy earlier. Don't delay too long. Contact me when you have the money." He left them. "Bruno, are you crazy?" Boots cried. "How can you even consider putting money that doesn't belong to us into the hands of that crackpot?" "You're the one who told me that that crackpot never loses," said Bruno. "So what's the problem?" "If you can't see the problem, you're as crazy as he is," Boots shouted. "You also need my signature at the bank, and I'm not signing." "Then you're going to be a turkey," said Bruno. "As a matter of fact, you're going to be worse than a turkey, because you could have saved yourself and didn't." "Better a turkey than a dead duck," Boots insisted. "There's no way I'm signing over $7,500 for George to play with." "How about 5,000? said Bruno hopefully. "No," said Boots firmly. "Well, what about Kathy's 3,000? suggested Bruno. "The fish doesn't even know about that, so he can't possibly find out it's missing." "No," said Boots. "You know," said Bruno, "you don't have the right to decide this thing for guys like Pete Anderson, who really want to stay at the Hall. Just because you don't have the belly for it doesn't mean the other guys don't. The fish said this bank account was a great responsibility. Well, it is. It's our responsibility to poll all the guys, and the girls too, to find out what they want us to do with that money." "You know darn well they'd want us to invest it," said Boots angrily. "Well then, that's what we have to do. Morally," said Bruno. "The question is how much." "No more than $50, said Boots. "That would be a waste of time," said Bruno. "I tend to lead toward 1,000. "All right," added Boots, 100. 700, not a penny less," argued Bruno. 2 then, said Boots. "Ridiculous." $2.50? It's a deal, said Bruno, much too quickly. Boots grinned despite his fears. They were friends again. The following morning, the Ralph's laundry truck that picked up and delivered at McDonald Hall twice a week went slowly down the driveway with its load of dirty laundry. As it was about to turn out onto the highway, the engine coughed once, sputtered, and ground to a halt. The driver checked the gas gauge. Empty. He left his truck and began walking back to the faculty building. Inside the truck, under a mound of rumpled sheets, Bruno nudged Boots. Why are we stopping? We can't be there yet. I don't know, said Boots. This was a terrible idea in the first place. Well, how else are we going to get to the bank? Asked Bruno. We can't very well ask the fish to give us a lift. He revoked our punishment, but he sure didn't say anything about fundraising. Why don't you look out the window and see where we are? Not me, said Boots fervently. If I look out that window, I'll see the fish looking back in at me. All right, I'll look. Bruno scrambled out from under the sheets and crept on all fours to the window in the back of the panel truck. Oh, no, he groaned. We never left the hall. The truck must have broken down or something. We're sitting at the end of the driveway. That means we're in full view of the whole campus, Boots wailed. We can't get out. Someone's bound to see us. Shh, they don't know we're in here yet, warned Bruno. Stop yelling. What are we going to do? Boots insisted. We'll have to wait it out, decided Bruno. Maybe they'll fix the truck and we can get to the bank. 45 long minutes passed. The two boys sat in miserable silence, listening to shouts from the nearby soccer field and far-off screams from the girls' field hockey team at Miss Scrimmage's. Maybe they'll fix the truck, Boots mimicked finally. And maybe they won't. How are we going to get out of here? Shh, someone's coming, whispered Bruno sharply. Get down. The back door opened and a huge laundry bag was tossed inside. It landed on top of Boots. Oof! Ralph? Queried the voice of Wilbur Hackenschleimer. Is that you, Ralph? No, said Boots. There's nobody here but us laundry. Wilbur! Exclaimed Bruno, poking his head out from under the pile. We're saved! A few minutes later, carrying 2 large laundry bags, one under each arm, Wilbur Hackenschleimer walked away from the laundry truck in the direction of Dormitory 3. This sure was a great idea of Kathy's, said Bruno with enthusiasm. He and Boots were lying flat on the floor in the back of Miss Scrimmage's black pickup truck. I thought we'd had enough excitement for one day, said Boots nervously. I hope no one saw us sneak over here. They were all at lunch, said Bruno. No one was around to see us. I wish I was at lunch right now, said Boots. I'm starving. We spent breakfast in the laundry truck and now lunch in a pickup. We'll probably spend dinner in jail. Why do you have to be such a pessimist? Asked Bruno. What can go wrong? Kathy said Miss Scrimmage has to go to the drugstore. The drugstore is right next door to the bank. It's all very simple. Boots just shook his head. Kathy and Diane stood on the front steps of the residence and watched Miss Scrimmage's truck pull out onto the highway. Hey, said Diane, she's going the wrong way. Kathy looked surprised. Maybe she isn't going to the drugstore. But you told Bruno. Oh well, Kathy laughed. So they'll have a nice ride. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Then again, maybe not. At 6 o'clock, the rain was still pouring down. Bruno and Boots, soaked to the skin and weak with hunger, dragged themselves into the dining hall. Bruno was livid. I'll get Kathy Burton for this, he said under his breath, if it takes me 200 years. What can go wrong? Boots mimicked savagely. Nothing much. Miss Scrimmage can go to the hairdresser, buy a darling new dress, stock up on shotgun shells, lose her purse and spend 2 hours looking for it. Everything except go to the drugstore. Both boys picked up trays and got into the cafeteria line, eyeing the food ravenously. Boots sneezed. Bruno coughed and wheezed. My goodness, how did you get so wet? Said the elderly lady who was serving dinner. It's a long story, ma'am, said Bruno. May I please have lots of everything? Boots sneezed again. Both boys were shaking with chills. You're both sick. Go to the infirmary at once. The infirmary? Asked Boots meekly. No food? You'll have something there, insisted the lady. Straight to the infirmary, now! Hurry, before you get worse! Bruno and Boots moaned in harmony and obeyed. It was not long before they were both propped up in adjacent beds in the infirmary, downing steaming bowls of cream of wheat with great relish. You know, said Bruno between enthusiastic slurps, this may have been a blessing in disguise. Boots gagged. Double pneumonia and a bowl of mush. Some blessing? What are you talking about? Well, look at it this way, explained Bruno. We're not really sick, and tomorrow morning they'll release us. They'll think we're in class, and our teachers will think we're in the infirmary. That'll leave us free to go to the bank, finished Boots without much spirit. Early the next morning, Bruno and Boots stepped outside the infirmary building, took a quick look around, and sprinted for the wooded area that lined the eastern perimeter of the campus. When they reached the cover of the trees, they slowed to a walk. "What time is it?" asked Bruno. Boots consulted his watch. 7:15, he replied. "When does the school bus come by?" "In about 20 minutes, said Bruno. "We'd better hurry." "Bruno, it's a little kid's school bus. How are we going to pass for little kids? The driver will kick us off." "No, he won't," said Bruno. "Just leave everything to me." "I left everything to you yesterday," moaned Boots, "and I had a wonderful day." In 10 minutes they arrived at the bus stop and slipped into line with a crowd of young children. As they filed onto the bus, the driver stared and then burst out laughing. "Big for your age, aren't you?" he asked. "I failed grade 3 6 times, Bruno grinned back hopefully. "You guys from McDonald Hall use this like your own private bus," said the driver. "All right, take a seat." Bruno glanced triumphantly at Boots. They were on their way. When the bank manager arrived to open the bank on the stroke of 10 that morning, he found Bruno and Boots asleep on the front step. They had been there since 8 o'clock. Bruno deposited Kathy's check to the McDonald Hall account, then began to fill out a withdrawal slip. "You know," he said, $250 isn't very much. Why don't we make it $500? "No chance," said Boots firmly. "$450 then?" "Bruno, we've been through this before. $250 or nothing." $400? That's a nice round figure." "All right," cried Boots in despair. $300. It's a round figure too, and there's $100 less of our necks on the line." Both signed the withdrawal slip. Boots' hand was shaking. Bruno pocketed 3 crisp $100 bills and turned to Boots. "Now we go home." "How do we get there?" asked Boots. Bruno's jaw dropped. Good question. "I guess we walk." "Walk!" exclaimed Boots. "It's 7 miles back to the hall." "Then we better get started," said Bruno. "I want to get this money to George." $300? exclaimed George Wexford Smythe III in disbelief. "Surely you jest. You told me you had 75. "My business partner is very cautious," said Bruno. "This will have to do for a start." "My dear Bruno," said George patiently, "the first rule of high finance is that it takes money to make money." "First, let's see how the investment goes," said Bruno. "There's plenty more where this came from." Boots looked sick. "You take care of that, George. Don't lose it." "I have no intention of losing it," George smiled. "I shall invest it wisely." He turned to walk away. "Hey, wait a minute," said Bruno. "What's the name of our stock?" "Lorelei Mining," replied George. 3 days after the investment had been made, Bruno Walton's head was buried deep in the financial section of the morning paper. Elmer Grimsdale and Boots O'Neill hung over his shoulder, anxious for news. "Here it is," said Bruno. "And look, it's gone up 2 cents. "We are $10 richer," said Elmer. "But we could have made a fortune if we'd invested the whole thing," Bruno exclaimed. $251.68 precisely," said Elmer. "See," said Bruno to Boots, "you're holding us back." "I'm not holding you back," replied Boots. "I'm keeping you sane. It could just as easily have gone down 2 cents, or more." "But it didn't," said Bruno, "and it won't. George knows what he's doing. His father made millions this way. That's why we're going to the bank to get the rest of the money." "No way," exclaimed Boots. "It's too big a risk." "If the rest of the guys knew you cost them $240, they'd wring your neck," insisted Bruno. "We can't afford not to invest now. Isn't that right, Elmer?" "From a purely mathematical viewpoint," said Elmer, "it would appear that you should invest further. However, I have not gone into the probabilities of the situation." "You see?" interrupted Bruno triumphantly. "We've got to invest the rest of that money." "Not all of it," said Boots anxiously. "Maybe another 300. "Twice small potatoes is still small potatoes," said Bruno. "And the shares are going to cost us 2 cents more now." "Well, maybe 400 then," agreed Boots. 5,000, said Bruno evenly. "Come on, Bruno, be reasonable," Boots wailed. "Don't you understand what's at stake here?" "I sure do," said Bruno. "You're at stake here, and Pete Anderson, and the honor of McDonald Hall. There's to be no more fooling around with pennies. You of all people should be willing to take a chance, since 1 is all you have." Boots swallowed hard. $1,000, he gasped. "Done," said Bruno, rather pleased with himself. "If we hurry, we can go out with Ralph." "Ralph? But Bruno, don't worry, said Bruno. Lightning seldom strikes twice at the same laundry truck. Actually, said Elmer, the odds are some other time, said Bruno. We're in a hurry. Your decision to invest further was a wise one, said George over dinner that day. Naturally, it would have been better to have invested the whole amount at 60 cents, as I did with the first 300. You now own 2,112 shares in Laureley Mining, presently worth roughly $1,300. Please invest the rest shortly. The secret of making money in the stock market is to buy low and sell high. Yeah, well, let's see how this does before we put in any more, said Bruno. Besides, I have to fight with my partner here over every cent of it. George nodded sympathetically. Haggling is so vulgar, he agreed. As word of the investment got around among the students, a new kind of insanity broke out at MacDonald Hall. Love of learning, specifically of mathematics. Mr. Stratton, head of the math department, could scarcely believe his good fortune when a delegation of boys, headed by Bruno and Boots, appeared in his office to request that all math courses include an immediate, in-depth study of the stock exchange. Comic magazines disappeared and were replaced by copies of the Financial Post. The few boys who subscribed to Toronto newspapers were literally mobbed each day when the papers arrived, by boys anxious for a glance at the financial pages. Boys who had trouble with their times tables now spoke with ease of blue chips, mergers, speculation, and marginal buying. The name Laureley Mining was on everybody's lips. Strangest of all, George Wexford Smythe III, ignored, ridiculed, and friendless, had become the most popular boy on campus. He was never seen without an admiring crowd, and there was a waiting list of boys who wanted to see him and his teletype machine for financial consultation. 5 days after the second investment had been made, Bruno and Boots arrived at George's room in a high state of excitement. George let them in. "How's it going?" asked Boots anxiously. "Quite an impressive gain," said George. "Last night, Laureley closed at 69 cents. You've made about $150. "Is that all?" said Boots. It seemed to him that they were taking a very big risk for a very small return. "Had you invested the whole amount," replied George reproachfully, "you would have made over 1,000. Bruno grabbed Boots by the arm. "Come on! We've got to get to the bank and get the rest of the money!" "Only another 1,000!" begged Boots pathetically. "Whatever," said Bruno. With yet another $1,000 invested, the stock market fever at MacDonald Hall was becoming even more intense. Laureley Mining became the only topic of conversation. It had become George's custom over the days to consult his teletype machine before coming to the dining room for lunch. On this particular day, some 10 days after the third investment, he entered the room, stood in the doorway, and cleared his throat softly. All eyes turned to him, and silence fell. Mr. Sturgeon himself could not have commanded order so quickly. "Laureley presently stands at 81 cents a share," he announced briskly. "MacDonald Hall holdings now total $2,884.41. There was applause from everyone except Boots. His eyes were strangely haunted. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when Bruno was suddenly hauled out of bed by his frantic roommate. "Bruno, wake up! Wake up!" Bruno was in a daze. What? Boots' anxious white face hovered over him. "We have to buy that stock, Bruno. Today!" "Today hasn't started yet," mumbled Bruno. "Wake me up when it does." "Bruno, the stock!" Boots repeated. "We've got to get the rest of the money and invest it right away." Bruno woke up instantly. "Now you're talking," he said with a grin. Ralph Kalachi pulled his laundry truck into the small shopping center parking lot, got out, and headed for the diner for a cup of coffee. In the back of the truck, a sheet moved. "We're here," it said. Boots O'Neill appeared from under a mountain of towels. "Let's go," he said. Bruno and Boots scrambled stealthily out of the truck, whipped past the diner, past the drugstore, and into the bank. "This time all of it," said Bruno as he began filling out a withdrawal slip. $5,250.29. "Let's leave the 29 cents, suggested Boots nervously. "Good idea," said Bruno. "Then we'll still have the account here, all ready for when we bring in the big boodle." They presented the slip to the teller, who prepared a bank draft for the money. Bruno pocketed the precious piece of paper, and they began the long walk back to MacDonald Hall. Both boys were very quiet as they trudged along the soft shoulder of the highway.